Sound check 1 2 3. Sound check 1 2 3. Sound check 1 2 3.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we have quorum present for today's meeting, I'd like to call this meeting of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee to order. Just a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during our committee meetings. We will start off with our roll call. If I could just get everyone to respond whether they're here or not. We'll begin with Councillor Kretsch.
I'm here.
Karen Burke.
Present.
Graham Carroll.
Present.
Andrew Douglas.
Present.
Lynn Ledstead.
Present.
Andy McLaren.
Present.
And Stefan Smolnik.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. Mr. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a few changes to the agenda. Under item 6, delegation requests, we have 2 added delegations respecting item 8.1, heritage permit application HP 2024-033 under section 34 of the Ontario Heritage Act for the demolition of the Tivoli Lobby and Auditorium at 108 James Street North and 111 to 113 Houston Street North, Hamilton, PED 24232, Ward 2 for today's meeting. And we, under staff presentations, item 8.1, the presentation respecting that item has been uploaded. And under consent items, item 9.3, the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee minutes for November 12th, 2024 was added.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended?
I see Graham and Karen.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. I will now turn chair over to Graham for our next item, which is declarations of interest.
Okay, does anyone have any conflicts of interest, declarations of interest?
So I'll declare, so for the property known as 108 James Street North and 111 to 113 Houston Street North, the Tivoli, I don't have a direct connection to the property, but the current owner of the property is a client of the architectural firm that I work for. I'll also declare interest on 537 King Street East, which is the Rebels Rock. The firm that I work for is the architect for the restoration and redevelopment of that project.
Any more conflicts? Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Hang on, I'm on the wrong page.
Yeah, so I'll just
take back the chair. That's right.
Our next item is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. We have before us November 22nd, 2024. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes as presented?
I see Lynn and Andy.
And are there any discussions in regards to those minutes or any comments? As we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. I'll now pass on the next item is our communications item. I'll pass that chair over to Graham.
Okay, may I please have a mover and a seconder and put the communication items on the floor?
I see the council. And Karen.
Okay, so item 5.1, correspondence respecting item 8.1, heritage permit application, HP 2024 under section 34 Ontario Heritage Act. So the recommendation is to receive and refer to consideration of item 8.1. Is there any discussion on this communication item?
So if there's no discussion, we'll vote on receiving just 5.1.
Okay. Mover and a seconder, please.
No, we've already got that. She just can call for the vote.
Okay. Oh, anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries.
Taking back the chair, is there any discussion on the balance of our communication items? We have items 5.2 to 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5. Is there any discussion or questions? If not, we'll move to vote on those items. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. And I will now turn the chair back over to Graham.
So this is now a delegation request. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the delegation requests?
I see the councillor and Andrew.
Is there any discussion? If not, we'll go to vote. Seeing none, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. So before we begin our delegation for today, members are reminded that questions of the delegations are for the clarification purposes only, not for debate. And a note to the delegates, you have 5 minutes to complete your delegation. You will hear a tone after 4 minutes, and you will have an additional minute to finish up. So under item 7.1, delegations respecting item 8.1, heritage permit application, HP 2024-033 under section 34 of the Ontario Heritage Act for the demolition of the Tivoli Lobby and Auditorium at 108 James Street North and 111-113 Houston Street South. So first off, we have Carol Preamble of the Beverly Neighborhood Association.
Okay, so, okay, Rick, you can put it up now. You can start. It's testing, testing. That's pretty good. Yeah. Okay.
We're just having a bit of a difficulty sharing the delegates' presentation. Just bear with us.
Would you mind if we take a brief recess and we'll get you all set up?
No, I don't mind. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, mover and seconder for 5-minute recess, so whatever necessary. 10-minute recess, sorry.
I see Lynn and Andrew.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to welcome back Carol Preamble to the podium. Sorry I didn't introduce you earlier. Carol has been a longtime member of the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee, really involved in heritage in Hamilton, and it's a pleasure to have you here to speak to us today. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Graham. Mr. Chair, members of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee, Councillor Crutch, city staff, media, other presenters, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this particular site involved in an application for approval of demolition. I am actually representing the BNA because I've been with them since I've come to Hamilton, and I'm the Heritage Board member who they sort of come to for, any questions, or if there's anything happening in Beasley. I tend to get on it, and also am the project coordinator, so we've done a lot of projects. So we've actually been through this. We've actually been through the Tivoli, a Tivoli proposal by a former owner. So that shows that BNA has a bit more involvement in it than perhaps other neighborhoods might. Myself, I've got 30 years experience working in heritage with every level of government as staff, contract consultant, with the Ministry of Culture as a community development officer and a consultant on heritage impact studies, adaptive reuse, and I was actually on the involved in the Elgin Winter Garden project, which when they first opened the Winter Garden, after 50 years of it being closed, I documented the whole thing, like every piece of it. So it was really a remarkable experience. I'm not going to go into too much here because I only have 5 minutes and I have 13 slides. So as you could see, it kind of grows and grows. So next, please. This shows what I was going to say, and while I'm talking here, I'll just let you know that the BNA and other of the heritage advocates felt that this building was going to be restored twice, at 2 times. The Diamante owner, part of their development proposal had to do with develop area restoring the Tivoli Theatre. And then next slide, please. And then on April 2022, when Adventus took it over, we got this headline: Tivoli Theatre to be restored by new owners. So it came as quite a shock that it was going to be demolished when, I attended the Heritage Permit Review Committee meeting. And I was, naturally sort of more upset than I am now, having done a lot of research, spoken with the city. And I just want to go through a few things that I just want to point out. I thought there would be more public here, and maybe it would be beneficial for them to know what the city has to use, what the owners have to do, but there's not that many, but I'll just do it anyway. Okay, next slide. Okay, everybody I think knows about the Ontario Heritage Act tools, that designated properties are given heritage. Designated heritage is given considerable protection if the municipality decides to use it, that there is actually a $1 million fine, which you probably already know, for a demolition that's not approved. And there's fines, and you can actually, the city can go in and fix a building that's neglected and send a bill to the owner. So there's several other parts to it, but okay, next slide. This is the glory that was the Tivoli not too long ago. And then next slide, the ravages of neglect. We are having a real challenge with demolition by neglect and neglect of other particular sites. So I'm going to go, I'm not going to talk about the secondary plan because I will lose all my time, but I want to go to next. Yes, I want to go to a compromise in Kingston with heritage preservation and high-rise development with a theatre involved. And so you see on the left, there's the Capitol Theatre, and the Kingston Heritage Advocates spent a ton of money legally, like $100,000, to try to defend this. And so there was a compromise, which is the facade is still there, was originally going to be torn down, and then you see the building in the back. Okay, restoration and reuse. This is another example of restorations that nobody thought would happen. This is just current, the Empress Theatre in Montreal. It has a burnt out, really decrepit interior, and it's going to be, it was bought by the city and it's now going to be sold. And then just one more slide I just want to show you. That's a precedent for heritage rescue. And the next one you must see. There. This is Detroit. This is a building that, as you can see, is totally like on collapse, ready to collapse. And somebody fixed it up. So, and going forward, I have some options and stabilization and security, blah, 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 blah. And you know what those are because you're the committee and there's staff here. So I don't have to go into that, but thank you so much. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces here today, and thanks, Matt, for your help.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Does anyone have any questions of the presenter? Carol?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Cameron, or Councillor Crutch, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation, Carol, and all the work that you do to try and preserve heritage in our core. I had a question for you. Could you give us some representative examples of different kinds of situations where heritage has been restored? And those are helpful for us to understand sort of what the powers we have are, how the Heritage Act works, and seeing some examples, especially downtown Hamilton, where people said, we're going to lose this building, and then we put the efforts in to restore it. My question for you is more so around the reports in front of us, right? So about the specific context for the Tivoli Theatre, because I think it's important that we look at this project, look at it specifically, what's being said about it. Notwithstanding the fact that, of course, we understand what's been going on around it. Have you looked at the third-party report from John G. Cook? So there was, just to summarize, so I'm being fair here, there was the original engineering report by Kalos Engineering, and those folks, then there was a plus VG, those folks did something, and they have some restoration chops. And then there's a group here that's registered with, heritage professionals around the province, John G. Cook, and then they gave a report. I'm wondering if you had a chance to look at that and what your comments on their specific report was.
Yes, I did. Actually, Alyssa sent me that with the staff report, and I was very glad to see it because at the permit review, we were really concerned about getting a little bit more detail and maybe getting, an independent look at it, as I mentioned. And so I was very pleased to see when I read that from Alyssa that there was so much more information from those two sources. What did I think of it? It seemed to be in keeping with what was already said. It added more things. The funny thing is I found that they weren't really explaining things as if it was going to be demolished, which is interesting because sometimes a study will do that because they believe it's going to be demolished. So everything kind of goes that way. And this didn't really go that way, but it still had the more detail about what needed to be done. And I definitely could see that for the Tivoli, at least what I got from it, was that if you tried to restore it, you'd basically have to rebuild it, and then you'd have to redecorate it from scratch again after remediating everything that's in it. And they said that possibly it still would be a problem because of some of the water damage and the leaks that it has. And those, had sort of challenged any kind of restoration hopes. So, yeah, it helped me a lot to get into that with more detail. And I thought it was you did it really quickly. I didn't know, and I'm really glad that it was done. So that's what I can't remember any specific details, but I do remember the part about, what's on the walls. It's kind of
Thank you. I really appreciate your insight. I had a second question. It's a bit more broad, but of course it obviously applies to this site. As part of the report, it talked about there being some safety issues with respect to the structure. And we've obviously seen around Hamilton, unfortunately, even recently, where that balance is very tricky, right?
Yes,
you want to make sure that you preserve a building before it falls down for all kinds of reasons. When something spontaneously falls down, it's obviously a huge safety risk. And we also want to preserve things we can before an order to comply to destroy something also happens. So there's like that balance, and the report kind of talks about that. So I guess what's your perspective on that in terms of where's that line, in terms of there's a worry that the building might deteriorate to the point where an order is issued to say, well, we better demolish it or it's going to fall down, versus trying to keep that thing going in the meantime. Because it takes time, as you know, right, to get from today, December 13th, to the point where we can restore a building. In the meantime, right, it's sitting there in the weather and the elements and that kind of stuff, and there's a risk to it. So I was just wondering what you think about that kind of balancing act that we have to play as a city.
Yes. I think it's totally achievable because of the Ontario Heritage Act and the ability of municipalities to create a bylaw with more specific heritage property standards in addition to your already building standards, which I've read. And I've also read the new Guelph bylaw that because they were having this problem of buildings being demolished without any approval, plus buildings just being neglected and becoming, very unsound, that they enacted a bylaw just recently that has additional property standards that they will enforce, and that their inspections, they have increased the timing for them, which is really important. And the city just has to take that on as part of its policy of protecting heritage as an important resource for the community. So it's all there, and like I said, Guelph has done it and has provided many more details for heritage. I think it's just a great step forward, and that's what I would do. And I don't see that if you start from now, how that is going to happen. I think this is the end of it. I really do. I think it's going to turn around now, because what has happened has been devastating for the people who've worked for heritage, and we're looking into ways, and that's one of the ideas, because the other, they're just a little bit more general. Maybe you have to look at, how you're going to enforce that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And you mentioned something that I want to follow up on briefly, which is about that it's an important resource for the community. And so you and I both know, and I think everyone knows, that it's been closed for quite some time now.
Yeah.
And hasn't really been there for the community to be used.
No.
And so when you think about how this could be an important resource for the community, are there some ideas you had or some thoughts you had about what that looks like? Like what could a space like this be used for in today's time, where we see theaters are obviously struggling to get attendance, that kind of stuff. What do you see it could be in 2024 and beyond, right, as a resource for the community?
Yeah, if you saved it, if it remained and was remediated and restored. Yeah, I did think about that.
Like as a theater, you mean?
Well, as a space, as a building, and not be torn down? No, I did think about that, because sometimes it's like, since I've been in heritage conservation for my whole career, I just really want to save something that's important architecturally, historically, community-wise, contextually. That's what I go for first. But then, the question, like you've asked, is what do you do with it? What are you going to do with it? And I looked into that as well, and there are a number of theaters which have been restored, or a few, and they provide that space that was really needed in Hamilton. So you have to ask yourself, is that kind of space still needed in Hamilton, especially in that spot where it takes up a lot of land now, and what else could go in there? So I guess it would just be a matter of renting it to an organization that would pay, of course, and they would be using it for something like that. I mean, it is a huge capacity theater, so you have to really think about it, whether you could do big music concerts in there that you can't do elsewhere, like besides this Hamilton, the center, whatever, I forget the name of it, Ontario Center. Yeah, I mean, that's really enormous. So it can't, like, I usually think, save it, restore it, and then figure out what you're going to do with it. But actually, I think it's really important to kind of be proactive about a plan for what you're going to do with it. But I don't think if you don't have something to do with it, you should tear it down. I don't think that's a criterion at all, to tear it down because there's no use for it. There's always a use for it. Like, it could be, you know, the Hamilton Museum, which is desperately needed, you
Okay.
know.
Thanks so much, Carol. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate your answers.
Well, thanks, Cameron, for asking them. Anybody else?
Hey, does anyone else have any questions of the speaker? No, saying no one does, I have a couple.
Oh, good, okay.
Okay.
Oh, good, great.
Okay, looking at the present damage on the building.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
If you could just hand the chair over to
Oh.
someone else, maybe Karen could take it.
Karen, can you take the chair, please? Okay. Okay, so looking at the present condition of the building, if they were to prevent further water incursion and environmental hassles, do you think it's possible to save the envelope and some of the interior until they manage to get a plan to fix the rest of it?
Well, I'm not an authority, you know, on engineering and construction, but I have seen some, you know, pretty destroyed interiors, and I do believe that from my experience of seeing a lot of buildings in quite awful condition, I think that anything can be repaired, and of course all the toxic material can be remediated. The thing is that what you have then, of course, as you said, is the structure, you know, the actual just space, and then you don't have the this. You're not going to be having what's in there now even, or has been, which is that kind of Roman revival, you know, additions on the walls, on the ceiling. Those would go, but you know, my next consideration would be, how would you put a development around it if that development is approved? Because it's kind of, it breaks up the area. But no, I would definitely always vote for restoration because that's just what I believe in. I hope I answered it there.
Yes, you did. I just wanted your experience on that.
Okay.
I just know from working in the steel industry what's possible for repairing stuff, because I've seen some pretty blown out equipment also get fixed.
Yeah.
Okay, now the other part, there's a proposal for a music hall across the street here that's looking at $3 million in grants. Do you think it would make more sense to put it into that space and turn it into a concert space instead of the concert hall across? I think it'd be better for the community.
Yeah, I really think that interior, it's, as Diane will, I think, probably point out when she comes up, the acoustics of that particular theater are like outstanding. So I think it would lend itself very well to that. And I think I read in the addendum that it would cost $6 million to get the place sort of cleaned up, stabilized, and start from there. So it would cost that. So if you could get grants or some kind of investment in, you know, from investors or partners, you could do that. I think it would be a great space because you know how everybody is in that area for all of the super crawls and the art crawls, and there's just a lot of music in that area from, you know, sort of Wilson up. There are a lot of musicians and working bands, and you know, I think it would be super space. But that's just my opinion because, you know, I don't want it is beautiful, and I even the space is beautiful. Even if you just, you know, took away all the decoration, it still would be a great space.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Anyone
Okay.
else have any questions, follow-up? Sorry, I sort of passed the chair over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Okay. Thank you for presenting, Carol. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Dr. Diane Dent. Diane's been a very long time advocate of heritage here in the city of Hamilton. Was once chair of this fine committee, was on the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee for multiple years, and right now is with Friends of Akbar.
I can't believe it. I've been doing this for
welcome,
50
Diane.
years, and it gets harder every year because most of you don't know me. So I'm going to have to speak very quickly because I've never had a meeting where I had to be able to talk for 5 minutes. But first I want to thank the Municipal Heritage Committee, members of the City Council, and I haven't ever met Kevin Crutch, and the staff. Thank you. I am not a heritage consultant. I am a heritage advocate since 1972. So I want to quickly tell you a little bit about the background. Following the closing of the Tivoli in 1989, Sam Snyderman contacted me. Sam was considering selling the Tivoli Theatre to a foundation or the city for a charitable receipt. Following a meeting with Councillor William McCullough, I contacted Carl Turkstra, Albert Alexanian, and Chester Waxman. They agreed to meet with Sam, tour the Tivoli, and discuss forming a foundation. During the tour, Sam clapped his hands and told us that the Tivoli had the best acoustics anywhere that he knew of in Toronto or Hamilton. We all met with Sam in a coffee house on James Street to discuss the details, and we were all excited. Unfortunately, a day or two after the meeting, Sam called me to tell me that his brother Sid and his accountant told Sam not to sell the Tivoli, and so the foundation idea fell through. As you know, several years later, it was reported that in 2004, Sam Snyderman sold the Tivoli to Belma Delamonte of the Canadian Ballet Youth Orchestra for $2. We also learned that Belma, CEO of the Ballet Company, a registered charity, sold the building to Diamante Holdings, her husband, for $900,000 in 2014. This is from the newspaper. These aren't my ideas. I would like to know, why was this allowed? I was told by the architect in the neighboring building that when the vandals were entering the vacant building and removing artifacts and copper wiring, he called Delamonte, the owner, and reported these incidents, but the owner did nothing. Since 2014, who in the city has been responsible for inspecting the Tivoli, a vacant heritage building? That concerns me greatly. January 2020, while I was volunteering to supervise McMaster University fourth-year history students for their public history practicum on the Tivoli, the students asked the planning department for inspection reports. The students were told there were no inspection reports. Is it the policy of the City of Hamilton to inspect vacant buildings, heritage designated buildings every 4 months? Who is responsible for inspecting vacant buildings? How many years has the Tivoli not been inspected? The Tivoli, in my personal opinion, and a lot of other people in this city, we say the Tivoli must not be demolished. There are lots of examples in Canada, and I can get them if staff or this committee wants me to, that there have been, as Carol pointed out, other buildings that are not maybe as great as this. They have not been demolished. So again, I ask, who is responsible for the current state of the Tivoli Theatre? Is it the owner? And he didn't have inspections? Is it the city? Is it the councillor? Who's responsible? And who is responsible for inspecting any vacant buildings? The city, in my opinion, must engage an approved heritage engineer to examine the buildings and report back to council. I have met Tacoma Engineering, and I would like a second opinion or a third opinion. One opinion, in my opinion, is not enough. The city must investigate other theatre sites in Canada that were in a deteriorated state but have not been and have been restored. In the meantime, this is important because Graham Carroll asked a question about what the state is now. So, in my opinion, in the meantime, security must be in place at the Tivoli Theatre to prevent a fire, further vandalism. The roof must be repaired to prevent further water damaging. So that is my information for you, and I'll be glad to ask any questions. I just find this devastating that this has happened. Thank you for letting me speak and to be overwhelmed.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Dent. It was really enlightening. Does anyone have any questions of the delegate? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Obviously, I'm a lot newer to Hamilton than you are, to the point where I've never actually seen the Tivoli or the inside of it. But I can tell you that, I definitely see the community, I've heard overwhelmingly the community engagement for this particular piece of property. And what I'm really curious about, and it sounds like you definitely have the history about it, is why was it chosen, why was the designation kept after the front fell down?
Thank you for asking that. I was either chair of Black Hack at that time or on the Municipal Heritage Committee. And there are two sides to every story. But the ceiling of that frontage had a heritage ceiling, but no one seemed to care. And so it was demolished. And that, again, is the reason that I say one engineering company is not enough. We had a heritage engineering come to Hamilton for James Street Baptist. If you have 3 companies, then some consideration is made as to who is right, who is wrong, what can we do. So to answer your question, why was that demolished? I would say, in my opinion, with little thought.
Sorry, just to clarify my question, it was actually why was the designation kept after it was demolished?
Oh.
So you lost the front of it. A lot of people would say
I
that's where the value is. So why was it kept after that point?
You mean for the rest of the...
For the rest of the building. Why is it still designated even though we lost
Because
that part?
it's important. There was the acoustics, and I'm sure that Carol or someone, Councillor Crutch, would have photographs of how incredible that building was inside, all the heritage features. The heritage features were there when a group of us toured the Tivoli in 1989. And so if the designation was still there, why were inspections not taking place? I think that's the crux of the question. Whether it's a small house that's designated, whether it's the Bank of Montreal building, or the Tivoli, or any other building in town. Demolition by neglect is our enemy. I don't know whether all of you travel, but I would suspect that some of you have. In 1972, we asked the councillors to tour Durand, where there was easements that were given that shouldn't have been given. So that the councillors on their own rented a little bus and went street by street to see what buildings were endangered. And everybody's busy. Everybody's been worried about COVID and what's going on in the world. But perhaps the answer to your question is, if the mayor's office could hire a Mohawk student or a McMaster student, and the list for them would be, what heritage buildings are there in Hamilton? When were they last inspected? And what is the legislation in this city for inspection of heritage buildings? I am told it may be that I would have to call my councillor and say, I'm worried about this building. It needs to be inspected. I think the onus has to be certainly on the citizens of Hamilton, but it has to be on members of council. I mean, I'm not applauding myself that for 50 years I've been a heritage advocate. I moved from Toronto, Kipping and Screeby. And Herman Turkstra in 1972 said, Diane, I want you to form the Durand Neighborhood Association. And I said, I'm a pediatric nurse. I knew nothing about heritage. I know nothing about neighborhood associations. And now Herman sees me and he says, don't you talk about anything but heritage? And you know, if you want to love your city, you have to have members of council, members of this committee, to take the reins and be responsible. And I'm devastated that there's so many buildings. James Street Baptist, the Tivoli. We're looking for a long-term lease for Ockmar. And you asked about funds, Cameron Crutch, or maybe Graham did. There are means. I have spoken with 4 large developers to talk about the restoration of Ockmar. You know that Joseph Mancinelli, LIUNA, put in a a submission for long-term lease for Akbar. He was turned down, and now he has a long-term lease for the Shadok Belfer. There are people in this city who have a lot of money and care. They're not all developers. So I could go on and on. I'm very sorry I've taken so long to answer your question.
Hey, anyone else have any questions of the speaker? Oh, Karen?
Thank you. I just want to say, Diane, Carol, really appreciate you taking the time to come in here and speak to the committee today. You presented different perspectives, and it is greatly appreciated and valued. So thank you very much, both of you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Cameron, or Councillor Crutch?
Yeah, thanks, and apologies for our previous meetings not being memorable, but I know we've met before. Yeah, a couple of questions for you. You know, you talk about council, and I think it's important to get a bit more of a sense of how you see that role. I mean, certainly we rely on our city staff and building engineers, and I'm not an engineer, and I know that in the 70s and 80s, we had a board of control here where we had kind of professionals that were around, and they would sort of help us supervise some of the departments, and that was kind of the model for councillors, and of course it's changed dramatically since then. But you said it a few times during your comments that you think councillors or council should be responsible for this, and so you talked about the trajectory from 1989 to now, I suppose. Are there certain things you think that should have happened, or certain milestones along the way where you think council or councillor should have intervened? Certainly, I've only been here for a couple of years, so you know, I'm just trying to get a sense of what you're needling at here, or what specifically you're trying to say.
Thank you for your question. It gets back to bylaws. So you are the elected officials. In my opinion, I have to be careful what I say, it is up to council to receive advice from planning. And in my opinion, again, planning is different from heritage. People can plan, but it's the heritage consultants who need to give you advice. But it's the bylaw department who has to tell you, and maybe it's up to the councillors to say, I have 8 buildings in my ward or 1 building in my ward. I would like to know how often you inspect those buildings, because you are the elected official. And unfortunately, we throw the questions back at you. If you're elected and your salary is being paid by us, it is your responsibility to get to propose the questions and to get the answers for staff, whether it's road resurfacing, whether it's your neighbor who doesn't keep up his property, or whether it's our glorious heritage buildings that bring tourists to the city and also make people happy to live here. I'm not happy right now. Fortunately, we've had some wonderful successes in the past. But your question, asking who's responsible, Bill McCullough used to call me and say, Diane, we're going to lose the Unified Family Court. What are you doing about it? And so we had a neighborhood association. So he would contact me. And I would say in today's world, we have to contact the councillors. Why? You might be new to the city. You might know not how to go about it. And maybe it's the responsibility of the neighborhood associations to contact you more regularly with questions. And again, that puts the onus back on the citizens. But it also puts the onus, in my opinion, on the councillors, because you're the elected officials. So that's helped me understand, too, to maybe send all of you questions more often.
Thanks for your perspective, Diane. Appreciate it. You talked about the bylaw, and one of the things that we do as city councillors as part of our official function is to approve budgets. And so sometimes staff will come forward and they'll ask for funds, right? And so over the course of many years, if you look at since amalgamation until now, in the last 25 years, you'll see that sometimes or other we fixed the budget at a certain number and said, okay, it's got to come in at this rate. And then, of course, that means, well, the bylaw department might have said to someone, well, we need to have more people to be able to enforce property standards, or we might need to have more folks to ensure that we're safeguarding heritage buildings. You can ask a question, but if you ask it into the void and there's no one there to answer your question, then, of course, you're not going to get an answer. I take your point. point, quite acutely there. It's an important thing to say. My question for you is, do you think it's important that city councils fund enough staffing resources, engineers, these kinds of people, and experts to ensure that we can safeguard our heritage buildings? I think the answer from the question will be yes, but I'm asking because I want to know what you think about, our role as councillors in terms of the budget and making sure we have the dollars to support this work.
No, I would say that council has to be responsible in how the funds are spent. Now, when the Piggott Building windows were taken, Heritage Hamilton Foundation reimbursed the person who took them. So there are limited funds, but if the example for me today is who is inspecting vacant heritage buildings, and one of them is the Tivoli. So if there aren't funds, ask Heritage Hamilton Foundation or Mohawk or McMaster, would you pay for a student to have a summer position here, and their job would be to find out what heritage buildings have not been inspected in 4, 8, 20 years. So the funds would not necessarily come from the city.
Sure, but your point is that we need to have the support so we can have people to actually do this work, is your point. We need people to be able to do the work. Right. Okay, thanks. Appreciate your answers.
Hey, anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Diane, for Dr. Dent for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you to all the members of council and the Municipal Heritage Committee for taking the time to listen. Thank you.
So may I please have a mover and a seconder to receive the delegations?
I see Karen and Andrew.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. And I finally hand this back to you. Nope. So now we have our staff presentations. So heritage permit application HPE. That's what oh yeah. Under HPE 2024-033 under section 3, section 4 of the Heritage Act for the demolition of the Tivoli Theatre. We have Alyssa Golden. Thank you. Cultural Heritage Program Lead is here to introduce the presentation.
Thank you. Through the chair, Alyssa Golden, Cultural Heritage Program Lead. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the staff report and this particular heritage permit application, and then pass it over to the applicant team, who is here to give a more detailed presentation. So just set the stage in terms of this heritage permit. Again, HP 2024-033 regarding the Tivoli Theatre and proposed demolition. For some context for folks who are not familiar, although I think we all are, this is a relatively large lot. It spans between James Street and Houston Street North, and shown here are some as-found images of the exterior of the building currently. And the property is comprised of the former Tivoli Theatre. The property is designated currently under the Ontario Heritage Act by 2 separate bylaws that collectively protect what remains of the lobby and theatre, an auditorium, sorry, of the theatre. I will note on the left is what used to face James Street North, the western portion that collapsed and was demolished in 2004. Currently, only interior features remain that are protected by the designation, and the exterior brick facades, which you just saw, are not currently protected under the Ontario Heritage Act. The staff report provided in the agenda is quite extensive. I have some slides with some background summary in case we need to pull them up later during discussion. Just want to highlight a few things here in terms of, as already discussed, the partial collapse, the building collapse and then partial demolition of the western portion back in 2004, changing of hands of multiple owners in those subsequent years. There was some work to help fund stabilization and heating improvements through city grant and loan programs in the late 2000s. In 2015, there was a substantial rezoning application that did propose retention and restoration of the theatre and did allow for substantial development on site as an accessory use to the theatre being retained. That was in 2015. And there was some work to try to advance that. 2016, there was a heritage permit that was approved to demolish the lobby portion of the structure. However, that was not implemented, and that particular proposal never moved forward. And to provide some clarification on some of the discussion points we've heard today, the building's been registered vacant since 2020 and has been actively monitored by municipal law enforcement on a quarterly basis since then. There was new ownership that took possession of the property in 2022, and there was a formal consultation application last year for redevelopment of the site that proposed demolition. Staff have been in conversation with the applicant discussing what would be required as a part of potentially moving that application forward, and this heritage permit application was submitted in October. It went to the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee on November 12th, where the subcommittee recommended refusal. There was an initial heritage impact assessment and supporting materials provided. Following that meeting and discussion and some subsequent conversations with the subcommittee and councillor, we did request additional information, and that's been provided as an addendum, including a second opinion and additional review by a professional engineer with qualified heritage experience. And I'll just highlight the scope of the permit is to demolish what remains of the theater, lobby, and auditorium structures. There's the initial heritage impact assessment and the supporting building condition assessment and various studies that are included as Appendix B to the report on the agenda today. And then the addendum materials, which includes an updated addendum from the heritage consultants plus VG, as well as a condition assessment from John G. Cook and Associates that I just mentioned. And those materials are attached as Appendix C to the report in front of you. Staff did also receive some additional responses to questions at the time that this report was being finalized, so it wasn't included as an appendix, but it did help inform the conditions proposed in front of you. More detail will be gone into by the consultants, but I just want to highlight the findings. Generally, it was determined that the structures are in an advanced state of deterioration. An approximate cost of about $5.875 million, that includes 25% contingency, was identified to just try to reconstruct and repair the building envelope itself to make it safe to occupy. That does not include any sort of actual heritage restoration and plaster work. Asbestos was found throughout the building, and the condition of the asbestos-containing plaster was determined to be extremely poor. The interior designated elements would need to be removed completely to facilitate any repair work to the structure itself and due to the presence of the hazardous materials throughout. And the addendum provided did include an estimated cost for just the abatement component of this project, which would be $1.14 million. The heritage impact assessment provided with the application determined that it was not feasible to restore the existing features, designated features of the interior of the building in place, and recommended demolition and proposed measures to mitigate the impact of that demolition, which includes providing a new event space in a new development that pays homage to the former Tivoli Theatre, commemorating the former Tivoli Theatre in the new development with a new public interpretive center and theatre lobby, interpreting the architecture of the former carriage factory, the portion that used to front onto James Street North that was demolished in 2004, and to ensure that the entire building is fully documented prior to demolition. In terms of staff's analysis of what was submitted, we did determine that the existing designated interior features cannot be feasibly retained and restored in place. The proposed demolition would obviously cause significant displacement and disruption effects, as it would propose demolition of this significant heritage resource. And to mitigate the impacts of that demolition, there are conditions proposed for interpretation and commemoration measures as part of redevelopment of the site. And we can come back to this afterwards, but as shown in the staff report, the staff recommendation is to approve the heritage permit application to demolish subject to conditions. This would include a series of requirements to develop a conservation strategy to guide those measures that I just talked about in terms of mitigating the impact by providing commemorative interpretation measures within a new development, and to tie the applicant to actually implementing those recommendations, a requirement for financial securities for that to be held to make sure that that takes place. And to ensure that the project is advancing and moving forward, a requirement for the submission of a complete application for a required zoning bylaw amendment prior to demolition of the structures. Okay, at this point, I will pass it over to the applicant team who's on the call today. I have the list of folks who are here on the screen for information. And I just want to highlight in terms of what's already been discussed today that there are a number of representatives as a part of the consulting team, including 2 representatives plus VG architects who are a part of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals, as well as the consulting engineer on the call today as well. And with that, I will pass it over to the team.
Okay, you can get started if you wish. Yep. Do you know who's going to speak on your behalf first?
I believe I am. Or Edward, are you going to start?
No.
Through the chair, happy to initiate. We were just waiting for the visual materials to come through. My name is Edward John. I'm planner assisting with this part of the process. Today we will have Paul Sapunzi providing the overview of the CHIA report that was submitted. And then obviously, as Alyssa kindly took us through, there's a number of us on the call today to assist with any questions following the presentation that you may have to help you render a decision. So with that, I'll pass it over to Paul and once again, be here available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Can we have our presentation up? Is this it?
It appears to be up right now, thank you.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Paul Sapunzi. I'm the president of the Venton Group Architects plus VG. I have 35 years of experience in the restoration, rehabilitation, and preservation of buildings, mostly institutional and cultural, throughout all of Ontario. Our firm has completed projects of this nature over, well, I would say hundreds of them throughout all of Ontario, and we've been doing it since 1972. Next slide, please. I just want to create some credibility, perhaps, for what we have done. We were the principal architects in the comprehensive restoration of Queen's Park. Next image. The old Toronto City Hall. Next image. We were one of the team for the Union Station restoration, which took a number of years. Next image. Oh, it's really slow. I apologize. Who's running the slides? Is that you, Deb?
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Can you scroll to the next image, please, more promptly? Yep. The Don Jail in Toronto, restoration of that. Next. The Law Society of Upper Canada and Osgoode Hall. Next. The new Niagara Parks Power Station Museum. Next. St. Michael's Cathedral, a very complicated large project on Church Street. Next. In our community here in Hamilton, I was the restoration architect for the POA courthouse, which used to be part of McMaster, I guess being used by McMaster University. Next, please. And one of the pinnacles of my career was the restoration and rehabilitation of the Hamilton City Hall and all of the interior. Next, please. I've also done several theatre projects throughout Ontario. They are projects ranging from Orangeville Theatre. I did Meaford Theatre. I've done literally 10 or 15 different theaters throughout of this type throughout Ontario as well. And I really like what the last delegate said. She said that she's really unhappy. And I want to say that I am also really unhappy about what's happened here and really saddened by what's happened here because our firm has proudly been able to save hundreds of buildings throughout Ontario. But we are at the intersection of a few very critical difficulties that make this building very difficult to restore, and these interiors very difficult to restore. And I'll talk about those in a little while. And as the last delegate said, I have a very heavy heart about this project, but as a professional, I have to present our findings and those of our consulting team. I want to clarify before I start that Elisa said it really best. I want everybody to respectfully understand that what is designated here is not the building, the exterior of the building. It is the interior finishes that are designated. And all of these finishes are about a quarter-inch thick layer of plaster, throughout the entire building. So next slide, please, Deb. So the purpose of the presentation is to provide the committee with a brief overview of the cultural heritage impact assessment and any additional information. And we reviewed the heritage value, the Tivoli Theatre timeline, which one of your delegates has actually already reviewed, the design alternatives and investigations, current conditions, and what can be done. Next image. Next slide. Oh, I think you skipped one. I'll ask Deb to go over a few of these sort of introductory slides, and then I'll go over the conditions. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Paul. So thank you and welcome everyone. The heritage value, as I guess we're reporting on our findings and as we've looked at the heritage designations and current conditions, we've found that the value has diminished over time. We provided a chart in the cultural heritage impact assessment as a table under the criteria to evaluate the designation done in 1990 and 2004 and current conditions that demonstrate this. Just for a quick refresh, the 1990 designation was about the carriage factory building and its significance. It talks about the the characteristics, the features, the steeply pitched roof, cornices, beautiful detailing, its prominence on James Street, the windows, of course, that are really unique, and eventually the marquee. It had a large presence on James Street. And yes, as time went on, and due to neglect, the wall, I believe that's the south wall on the Tivoli Theatre collapsed and partial roof. They went in to investigate, and it wasn't possible to restore it at that point, the building, and so it was demolished that same year in 2004. The 2004, so once it was, that's when the designation of the auditorium became priority to protect the interior and the theater space in the auditorium that was built in 1925. So it's the plaster, as Paul just mentioned, the ceiling, all the decorative plaster work that you can see here. We took a look at the timeline as well, just in terms of the carriage factory when it first opened, was constructed rather, and as it changed over the course of time, and it's not until 1989 that it was transferred and sold. The first time it had functioned as many things related to entertainment. There was a designation placed in 1990, just after the first property transfers. And again, we've noted the demolition and designation on here. I think what's probably worth noting is that the highlighted yellow areas are the events of when the property was transferred, which gets to be pretty substantial by the time we get up to the year 2020. Just touching on some of the alternatives that were looked at with the building when the owner purchased the property, to check various configurations to see how the theater might be able to be incorporated, what that might look like. Is there adaptive reuse of the theater for occupancy were some of the things that were looked at. They also undertook studies to look at the conditions, which we'll go into further here. And which have been documented. The structural investigations included significant deterioration and exterior brick and clay tile walls that have worsened. There's loss of roof structure integrity. Mostly it's water penetration, damages that have caused collapse and roof failure in areas. Floor framing requires removal and reinforcement to meet loading requirements as well. The report, structural review report, concludes that the building should be considered past the point of restoration, just due to the amount of damage. An environmental review was also conducted because of to investigate what materials were there, the conditions. So there is lead in paints and surface coatings, which are deteriorating, and you'll see some examples of the extensive peeling and flaking in the building. There's suspected lead, mercury, silica, and PCBs. There's also a lot of evidence. You can see mold growth prevalent on various surfaces throughout the building due to water and water damage and leaks. Asbestos is located or found throughout the building as well, but significantly it's in the plaster on the walls, the ceilings, the ornamental moldings throughout the building. It's also because of the conditions, it's breached and there's friable plaster around the building as well. This was a timeline we put together to just look at what the timeline of ownership, when the ownership started changing after the theater closed in 1989, the designations that took place, and you can see in a short period of time compared to its long history, this when it went through leasehold uses and has been unoccupied, so significant deterioration over the last 30 years. So I'll switch it back to Paul, who'd like to go over some of the conditions here.
Thank you, Deb. I'm going to kind of casually walk you through the building and point out some of the issues. I don't know how many of you have visited the building. I did have the pleasure of meeting Councillor Cameron there with a party of staff, and including Alyssa Golden, and we took a tour of the building. I've been in it several times. I've in fact been in it. I was in it back in the 80s when the original owner was there. So just sort of starting with this observation, projection room finishes are damaged due to structural deterioration as of the floor and the roof system. Let me give you an overview of how this building is built. It's basically a steel, kind of a steel structure. It's a composite structure of steel and clay tile. There's a steel frame that you can see columns in the wall. Then there's a steel roof structure. And then between the columns and the wall are what's called clay tile. And they are something that we don't use anymore for building walls. And that's a fired clay block that has cavities in it. The roof is a steel structure. And within the steel structure supporting all the roofing are these fibrous, I'll get into more detail, these fibrous panels. And what has happened, most importantly, is, and sitting on top of all of that is a substrate, which is a fibrous material and a metal lath. And then on top of that, for the majority of this, is about a 1/4 inch thick layer of finished plaster and then paint on top of it. So if you look at the whole structure, what I just outlined, what is designated is a 1/4 inch, some places it's thicker, of course, where the moldings are, but mostly what is designated is about a 1/4 inch of plaster. So let's walk through this. This is a view of the projection room. So what we're seeing here is significant water damage due to phenomenal roof failure, where water has been pouring into the building. Essentially, it's at many points the building has been completely saturated, soaked in water. Water is an interesting material. Most materials, when they freeze, they shrink in size. Water is a tricky one, though. For some reason, water expands. That's why you put a glass of water in the fridge, a bottle of water in the fridge, or a bottle of wine, and you let it freeze, it'll often break. It expands. So when water gets into these materials, the clay tile and into this 1/4 inch of plaster, and it soaks it like a rag, and then it freezes, what happens is these materials expand. And when they expand, they often lose their structural integrity. The plaster is very susceptible to that. So it's expanded and contracted and expanded and contracted for 34 years. And it's almost powderized, all of it. I've been able to pull the plaster off the wall with my hands, and it is disintegrated in my hands as I pulled it off. What that does is that the plaster is made with asbestos. Asbestos is not a joke. Asbestos leads to mesothelioma cancer. And here, a lot of the asbestos has become airborne. Therefore, you should never, ever go into this building without lung protection. It is cancerous. And unfortunately, all of this plaster is made with asbestos. And it's a 1/4 inch thick. And because of that, trying to repair the plaster, just trying to repair it makes it start falling apart. There just isn't a solid surface to repaint. And encapsulating it, which has been discussed, is also impossible. It has lost its structural integrity as a surface material. It would never hold the paint, and it will just continue to disintegrate. Next slide, please. So the building on its own, we're very lucky, actually. We have John Cook, who is a very notable structural engineer that is also a member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. So he is a structural engineer that focuses on heritage structures. And we'll talk a little bit about him later. The building as it is today is in grave danger of actually collapsing, and there have been a number of measures taken to stabilize it somewhat, mostly just to allow people to come in and just have a look at it and to prevent catastrophic damage of the strip mall that's next to it. Next slide, please. So some observations, other observations. There's a corner of the building that is in really, really rough shape. And it's actually the one that we can see. We don't know what's happening completely in the other areas. There is now this comes into the discussion of the clay tile exterior walls. There have been several lawsuits in Ontario about these clay tiles spalling. This building could have been built with stone. It could have been built with all brick, but unfortunately it was built very economically using what we used to call speed tile. The speed tile is made of clay, and clay is very absorbent of water. And water has gone into the cavity of the speed tile and is accumulated at the bottom of the walls. And it's been absorbed into the actual fiber of the clay. And again, as it froze, the speed tile expanded and contracted, expanded and contracted. Well, brick is not really designed, or clay is not really designed to do that. And it's caused a lot of powderization of the clay, and it's lost a lot of its structural integrity. When we had that delegation come to the building to take a look around, I was able to put my hand through the structural clay wall in several areas. This corner is the worst corner. This corner also has a clay pier, which has failed structurally, and there's about a 3-inch, I'm just guessing, looks like a 3-inch gap at the top of the wall between the pier and the rest of the wall. Also, the brick that's on the exterior of the building. Contemporary buildings have metal ties that hold the brick onto the wall. In those days, you would actually turn the brick. So it's multiple wides of brick, I think it's 2. So every now and then you would take one of the bricks and you would turn it on its short end and you would have it cross into the other layer of brick, and that would hold the brick wall together. Well, a lot of those bricks, from what I observed, have actually split. So there's very few ties. I think there's some, not very few, but I would say that has also been compromised here as well. So when you look at this at a high level, you say to yourself, the plaster, decorative plaster, is on a substrate of rusted mesh, which holds it all together, and that mesh is nailed to a wood strapping on the end of the building, on the inside of the building, which is attached to the brick wall. The wood strapping has become punky and rotten. And then that wood strapping is attached to a clay tile, which has lost, in many areas, its structural integrity. And then the clay tile is attached to a brick veneer, which has started to delaminate from the building, and you're getting catastrophic failure in this corner. So that's what I talked about, the intersection here. I just look at this problem as a heritage architect, and I've done a lot of tricky heritage work. And I say to myself that the plaster cannot be saved. The backup of the plaster cannot be saved. The clay tile cannot be saved. And then there's the brick that is problematic and how it's tied to the building as well. And in order for us to inspect all of the clay tile, you would have to remove the plaster, because no one would want to certify this building for Part 3 assembly occupancy of a theater without knowing what is behind there. this hidden clay tile that's been saturated by water and has been going through freeze thaw for over 30 years. Who's going to put their name onto that to create public safety? So it really is an intricate intersection of problems. So we would have, and then in between it are steel columns, and we have seen areas of the bases of the steel columns, they have rotted out. So each one of those steel columns needs to be inspected. The connections need to be inspected. The brick clay tiles need to be inspected. You can't do it with an X-ray gun. You've got to remove the finishes to do it. It is a profound problem. Next slide, please. So here is how this building is constructed, and you can see the damage at the top of that, and that's those clay tiles on the right. So then you start getting into how this is all made up. Those wood braces are rotten. The mortar between these clay tiles and in the brick has lime in it and lead. So that's what's holding this thing together. A lot of the areas, the mortar is just totally missing. You can see that on the right. And in certain areas, this corner in particular is really bad. At the bottom, I was able to put my hands through it, my one hand through it. I'm in the presence of Councillor Cameron. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'll try to hurry up here. It's a little complicated. So there's that metal lath which I mentioned, which is all rusted. That's what holds all the plaster together. Next image, please. Actually, leave it here. Sorry, go back. You see on the bottom right-hand picture, folks, how thin that plaster is. So that stuff that's left there at the bottom is all the backup to the plaster. The plaster itself is about 1/2 inch to 2 inches thick where it's decorative. Next image, please. So the deterioration of the plaster finishes. I held a flashlight up, which is what I do in these things. I held up a strong flashlight against the wall, and what I could see is fibers and plaster floating in the air, clearly. Friable means that it has disintegrated and it is airborne and it's flying around. Therefore, if any of you go back into this building, please be careful and protect yourself. Also, you can see in this image that some base plates as well are also rotten. Next image. Deterioration of the clay tile, more images of that. Considerable cracking in the brick walls. Next image, please. So I was talking about the roof and the panels. So those panels are made of gypsum, and they have asbestos in them as well. So there's the roof structure, which is these steel members, and then in between them are these kind of weird concrete gypsum panels that sit there, and on top of that they put the roof membrane on top and they tried to prevent the moisture. All of those got to go. They're all, you can see them on the left. They've just become huge sponges. They're falling out. They no longer have any structural integrity. And this is a kind of a composite structure, so everything kind of works together. I'll let John comment on that later. Next image. So the good news, even though it's not a lot and it makes me sad, but there is a little bit of good news. There are some lovely plaster statues. They're not bronze, as was thought in the past. They are plaster, and they do have asbestos in them, but they're substantial enough that perhaps we can encase them in glass in a new building, or try to come up with some kind of high-tech finish so that they are no longer friable, but they are lovely. And there's also some medallions that we could save. Next image. This is the lobby area. Here you've got hundreds of pounds of lead paint. A lot of it's already fallen. You walk through it like leaves in the fall. This is all very dangerous stuff. Next image, please. So there's all kinds of moisture damage in the wall. There's water damage and mold, black mold. If you can see the one on the right, the worst kind of mold, cancerous, very dangerous. And it's right in the structure of the building. You cannot seal that, cannot do anything with it. It's just going to continue progressing. It's a living organism. Next. Let's speed this up a little bit more. I've already talked about all the hazardous materials. It's like an encyclopedia of hazardous materials. So we had John do a structural report. You can actually see the steel columns have telegraphed through the brick. You can see the deterioration at the corners. Unfortunately, the exterior of the building has no heritage value. That was actually an interior wall there because the coach factory has fallen down and torn down or whatever. Next image, please. So, summary. I'm not gonna summarize these. I'm gonna summarize what everybody's most interested in. You've got a building starting from the inside out. You've got a building where the plaster is very thin. It's beautiful. It was not built, they didn't spend much money building it. I've restored theaters where it's actually woodwork and tin, and those are restorable. But this is a very thin layer of plaster. That plaster contains asbestos. That plaster has lost structural integrity through freeze-thaw cycle. That plaster has started to become airborne in the space. Behind the plaster is a kind of a horsehair board that holds it together that also has hazardous materials in it that has also been devastated by ice and water damage. Behind that is a metal lath, which is rusted. Behind that is a wood strapping system, which has become punky and rotten. Behind that is a clay tile system, which has, in the areas that I've seen, it seems to have lost structural integrity. Between the clay tile is structural columns. The columns, we don't know the condition of them everywhere. We do know that they have failed in key areas, and we know that some of the bases are rusted. We would have to remove the plaster, we would have to remove the backing and the metal mesh and inspect all of these columns. We would also feel comfortable with this building if we could inspect all of the clay tiles, which would again mean removing the finishes. Beyond that is the clay tiles. The clay tiles are gone. Then beyond that is 2 withes of brick. The joints between the brick, what holds it all together, seems to have cracked in some location. The brick has delaminated. All of the mortar is done. So then you've got a roof, you've got a rusty structure, you've got these gypsum panels that are done. I'm very sorry, everybody, but as a professional heritage architect of 35 years, this is one of the few times I've come across having to say that I can't see how you can manage the rehabilitation of this building, and particularly what is designated, which is this thin coat of plaster. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Deb to finish it up. And let's make it quick.
Got it. So just provided some information, which was already mentioned following the subcommittee review. So we do have the engineers here today, structural and environmental. If anyone has any further questions, So these are just summaries. I think you've heard Paul explain it in detail. So there's the exterior that's an issue. Roof and framing system requires major construction. The interior, like the integral system that Paul spoke about with the clay tile walls, which is tied to it, is in poor condition and needs reinforcement or structural elements, which are attached to the plaster. And again, that's with the water and moisture and asbestos. It's a major challenge and not considered feasible. Abatement, the same thing. There's asbestos in the plaster, in the walls and ceilings and ornamental moldings. There's also the airborne friable asbestos that's coated everything. Type 3 abatement would be required, which means containment and capsulation. Possibly it's a difficult process. Plus there's the lead removal in the paint on top of the plaster. It seems impossible. And the statuary, however, are not tested for lead themselves, but they are coated with the asbestos dust, let's call it, the particulate. But ideally, they could be encapsulated and relocated. There was a question that came up as well: is it safe or feasible to salvage the decorative plaster work? And no, just because, as we've heard, the contamination, it's not feasible, it's not safe. There are many levels of lead, asbestos that needs to be removed before most anything else can happen.
So, what can we do? So,
this one, Paul, if you'd like me to step in.
Yeah,
to talk
please
about
do,
this.
Dan.
Yeah, sure.
Please do.
Just for everybody who doesn't know me, my name's Dan Wojcik. I'm the COO of the Venton Group, and I've been working on this file with Paul and Deb. Personally, my great uncle was the last manager of the Tivoli Theater before it shuttered. So this is an important project for me personally, and we've taken this assignment very seriously. And based on the findings from all of our engineers, John D, who's on the line, and environmental engineers, and our own personal assessments as heritage architects, we've come to the conclusion that we can't save the building itself. But Alyssa pointed to these points in her staff report of what we can do to honor the legacy and the heritage of the building moving forward. And so there's three main points here. One is to protect and salvage, one through the donation and storage of designated features like the medallions and statuaries, which, just as a point of clarification, were not actually tested to confirm they were containing asbestos, but we assume they are. But there is potential to save those. And the other piece for the protection was the detailed documentation that we have on record now. So I'll speak to that in a bit. From an interpretive standpoint, we can interpret the heritage of the Tivoli Theater through the design of the new building, and we'll show how we make references and dialogues with the unique features of the original architecture in our proposal. I'll also at this point state that the design work is in its early inception and early stages, so there will be development as we continue to develop the proposal. And then third, through the commemoration, and how can we, through this project, allow the public to recognize the importance of the unconscious collective memory of the space and the heritage of the building. So next slide, Deb. So the first piece I'll talk about, which I already mentioned, was protection and salvage of the building. So there are some features that we are proposing to retain and turn over to the city for storage. And really what's important and impressive about the undertaking of documenting the building is illustrated in the images below. So the image on the right is a point cloud model of the building. For those of you who don't know, this is image and a 3D model of geospatial data that is constructed using a special camera that records the perimeter of the building, the interior of the building, in a very, very accurate manner. And then we can use that to reconstruct a model. What you see is like an architectural 3D model on the left side that will very accurately represent the proportions in the space and some of those features as well. So in combination with photo documentation of the very detailed porous plaster and our ability to regenerate a model that has the scale and the nature of the space, we can really produce a pretty accurate representation of what that is. And we're proposing to use this as a commemorative piece as well, which I'll describe later. Next slide, please. But just to highlight, the importance of that technology in the restoration of heritage buildings or the recording of heritage buildings. This is an image of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is recently reopened. And there's a great article that's available online that documents and details how that model was indispensable in the recreation of the building after it burned and collapsed. So we've undertaken the same processes. Next slide, please. To document the building. And the nature of this, the images do look a little bit grainy, but that's just the nature of the point cloud. These are all RBG points that are in a density that renders them in this sort of way. But you can see that it's accurately recording the existing condition of the building and some of these heritage features, the copper ceiling we see in the lobby here. Next slide, please. And not only the interior of the building and the heritage fabric, but it also shows the position of the theater in the context of the community and the neighborhood. Next slide, please. And here again, you see its position, and we've even recorded in the context of the James Street Heritage Conservation District. What's really unique about this technology is that as a user, you can start to move the walls and cut sections and really begin to interpret and understand what the heritage and the original theater was. Next slide, please. So the next piece is, how can we interpret the heritage of the Tivoli? What can we do to imbue some of those ideas back into our design proposal? And we're doing a lot through our proposal. So the design of the new building can reference the dialogues with the unique features of the Tivoli Theater, such as the James Street entrance. So here you can see an architectural drawing of a facade that we're proposing to reinstate into the podium of a larger building on the right here, and then a marquee that we're looking at reinstating as well. And then the entrance into the theater itself. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, just before we pass on that. So we see that there's a significant contribution, heritage contribution, by adding this piece of the building back into the James Street streetscape. And by referencing the fenestration, the scale, the materials, but in a contemporary fashion, we're honoring the heritage and the memory of the building and also filling in a blank space on James Street. Next slide, Deb, please. And finally, I'll talk about as a guiding principle or commemorative or commemoration through public access to the building. So the proposed residential development will honor the legacy of the Tivoli Theater through multiple measures, one of which was reinstatement of the lobby and the marquee. So in the previous image that we just saw, public venue space would be, or a venue space would be accessible through the lobby. So we would be entering into a sort of recreation, contemporary recreation of that lobby spaces up James Street North. And you would enter the building and ascend up through the towers to an event space. Another piece would be the introduction and reinterpretation of commemoration of the original carriage factory, which I just spoke about, and a publicly accessible interpretive lobby space. So we're proposing an interpretive center at grade where we could potentially display some of those artifacts that are salvageable through the building, but also incorporate ideas like allow the public to interact with that geospatial point cloud data through VR to allow them to experience the grandeur of the space firsthand. Next slide, please, Deb. So the proposed residential development will honor the legacy of the Tivoli Theater through multiple measures, including architectural and interpretive material. So the reinstatement of the lobby and the new marquee in the same location as the original Tivoli Theatre, which I've already talked about, is something that's sort of pivotal to our proposal. The reinterpretation and commemoration of the original Carriage Factory building in the heritage streetscape. So we're reinforcing the heritage streetscape by reintroducing a building in a similar stature and style as the original. The publicly accessible interpretive space in the lobby, which will have artifacts, print, 3D models that are accessible through virtual reality to help the public understand not only the heyday of the theater, but the entire lineage and history of the theater up until its closure. And we're proposing through that lobby space and interpretive space a dedicated elevator that would take visitors to an event space designed in the grandeur of the Tivoli Theater Auditorium. So not a replication of it, because we don't believe in that, but something that is a nod in a contemporary fashion to all of those elements that we've already discussed in this presentation. Next slide, please, Deb. So the commemorative elements and interpretive materials will chronologically document the detailed history of the Tivoli Theatre from its origins as a carriage factory to its eventual closing. And this rich history will be showcased through various multimedia exhibits like I've already described. So print, publications, interactive installations, and mainly what we're really excited about is the opportunity to allow members of the public to interact and view the space that's currently shuttered through this virtual reality experiencer. Next slide, Doug, please. So all in all, that's how we were proposing to protect, salvage, interpret, and commemorate the history of the theater. And I'll just turn it back over to Paul if you have any closing words that you want to say before we open it up for questions.
Not really. Thank you, Dan. And I'd like to say that we're very honored to present to this group. What you all do is very important, and the city of Hamilton is beautiful. Unfortunately, this situation is one that makes me very sad. And if we're here for any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation and taking the time to come in. So we'll start with some questions, the speaker list. We'll start with Councillor Crutch.
I think I really appreciate the presentation. A couple things I'll say in response to what you said, Paul. Yeah, I went there with city staff, folks in the Ward 2 team. We toured it in some detail, looked around it. I promise I wore lung protection the entire time, as I was instructed to do, and witnessed a lot of what Paul talked about. I'm grateful that Paul explained this in some detail, because I wasn't aware of things like how terracotta tiles or clay tiles and speed tiles work, how they're integrated into the fabric of the building itself and its structure. Like, I didn't understand all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very insightful. I learned a lot on that tour, and I've learned a lot in reading the reports. A big question I think that you can answer now, and I have several questions. I'll try to get through them all quickly so other speakers can go. But we look at the timeline, and I'm mindful of what the delegates had said earlier. At what point in this 20-plus year history, or 34 years, or however you want to understand this, at what point do you think this got to the point of no return? Obviously, you're looking at the current assessment now and saying, we can only really look at what we see in front of us and when we've been asked to do this work. But I'm trying to understand, because there are many milestones along the way that we saw from the original timeline that Alyssa showed us. In your estimation, how long has the building been in this kind of condition?
I would say if through you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to ask John to maybe follow up what I have to say. The nature of the deterioration, it's not recent. It's been happening for a very long time, because the deterioration has also deteriorated, so to speak. I think it's been going through, it takes a long time for a building to get to that level. It's got to be, I would say, more than 20 years. But I'd like Johns to maybe comment if he has anything to add to that.
Sure. Jonathan D. with Principal at John G. Cook and Associates. like Paul mentioned, I mean, really the issues we see here are ongoing issues that would develop over a longer period of time. But they get to a certain point where, the roof starting to fail, for example. Most of the issues we see are moisture related. And, once the roof starts to fail, and given the difficulty in even repairing that roof, more water gets in, and these issues do tend to accelerate quite a bit. So it's hard to say exactly. You can't really say when this started because it's an exponential gradient. It's hard to say at which point do you reach that decision. But we can certainly evaluate it based on the way it is today. And there are definitely concerns with moisture getting into a number of the elements of this building. My concern, especially with the roof, I mean, gypsum panels. There are gypsum panels on the roof of the Royal York Hotel in Toronto. That's a sloped roof. This is a flat roof made with the same panels. And, once the flat roof fails, water gets in there and causes a lot of damage. The steel structure as well, as Paul described, the building's not very complicated. It's a steel columns with steel trusses, and then a composite masonry wall built into those columns. And again, moisture getting into, the columns are not within a vapor barrier like you would do today. They're part of a wall assembly that absorbs water. And that deterioration, we can't even evaluate it properly. I can see that there are columns visible. You can pick the columns out on the building from the outside, some more than others, and that's a sign usually that there's ongoing corrosion, and because rust expands steel expands as it corrodes. And I can point to dozens of examples where we find steel embedded in masonry walls that is corroded. But I think the concern I have here, the Royal Bank building in Montreal, I pulled 2 inches thick of rust off of the columns, but those columns were huge. It was a 20-story tower, solid masonry. The flanges are a 1/4 of an inch thick, so there's not a whole lot of runway to lose material. So, that's one of my concerns here as well. But it's hard to say. I guess to answer your question specifically, it's hard to pick a point because these are all issues that did develop over a longer period of time, but they will accelerate, I guess, at this point.
Thanks. I asked because in some of the pictures we saw and some of the historical photos I've seen holes in the roof in here for 20 years, right? So 20 years ago, there were holes in the roof in some of these parts. And so I guess I'm trying to understand, because I think it's a question being asked in the community to the extent that the current owner is responsible for the deterioration of this. I'm just going to be very blunt about it. That's a question we get asked a fair bit. And people want to know, hey, they came onto this in 2022, kind of halfway through 2022. What kind of transpired between that period and now? Is that the period where we saw significant deterioration, or really was the building almost unsalvageable at that point? I guess I'm just trying to get a better sense of that timeline with respect to the changing ownership, if you know. And also, John, I'm assuming that you corroborate the findings of Paul and Paul's team, and I've read your report, and it might just be useful for you to say that out loud.
Yeah, I mean, he paraphrased a lot of my findings. I think my report speaks for itself. I've said worded things the way I intend to word them in my report, but I think the gist is essentially there from Paul, and he touches on all the same concerns that I have.
And do you have any thoughts on sort of, like I was saying, about the timeline for the current ownership in mid-2022? Do you think by the time that group came along, this was already at that exponential place, or do you think it was previously? I'm just trying to get a sense of that, right? Because I mean, that's again, there's a lot of different milestones and timelines. Just trying to track all this information for the public.
Yeah, I mean, I was not in there previously, so I don't know that I can speak to that exactly. I was first in this building in January of this year, and then re-involved of late. And even in that period, I can see differences, especially in the roof at the corner. That's corner specifically, where in fact we installed shoring. We in a hurry to make sure this shoring was in place for that pier that Paul mentioned that was it's being displaced. I estimated about 4 inches. We used a level. It's hard to get right up to it, but we put in shoring for that column because of the point to which that deterioration had progressed. And I don't know what the previous ownership. I was not involved then, so I can't really speak to that exactly. But The roof certainly in that corner has progressed further.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your honesty and trying to give us the best advice you can. Obviously, you can't go back in time, it turns out, and you're going to have to look at the things when you assess them.
Yeah.
A few more questions I had. I mean, a lot of the questions I had asked staff, and I want to thank staff for bringing in another group to have a look at this who are registered and do heritage restoration work. And that was a question I'd asked them to, because I heard at the Heritage Review Permits subcommittee people were asking, wait a minute, can we have a second opinion or a third opinion of this, and to get some folks in. So I'm grateful that staff did that, because I think it's important for us to hear these details. One of the things that we talked about here was an event space coming up with an elevator, and I mean, that sounds promising in a kind of way, but I guess I'm looking for the development team to commit to more than that. And what I mean is that when I went out and talked to some people who design art spaces and think about art spaces and think about what today we need in 2024 in downtown Hamilton, they came up with a list of 5 different things that they hear regularly, right? Individual artist studios, community exhibition space, meaning a place where communities can come and do something, not necessarily a gallery, but a place where people can do things like that. Dance or theater rehearsal space, which is in great need in our community. Administrative space for arts groups, which is desperately needed in our community. And then, of course, like this idea of just having a blocks box venue, which is kind of what we have now at the base of the building. And so I wondered if you could speak to when you're going to be coming back for zoning, if you would consider these things, because I think it's important for us to understand here today what you're proposing the community will get. It's great to have this idea of a reinterpretation, but that can be a bit hollow at times, and I understand that you're doing things in a progressive way and you're trying to do things in a modern way and trying to do them in a way that's sensitive and want to have people have this experience be created for them and having an event space. But there are needs in the community, and I'm wondering what the plan is here to try and make sure that what you get as an end result is something the community actually has a deep need for and can use on a regular basis. Because I think that's what I hear from the community a lot is, even though we haven't had access to the space in a long time, when people did have access to this space, community groups, theater groups, grassroots folks, all kinds of people could do things here, plan things here, show movies here, right? And so it was something that was owned in a collective way. And so how can we bring that back to the community in terms of the kinds of assets we see we need today? So I wondered if somebody from the development group would comment on that or put it on the record what your intentions are, and if you'd be willing to come back to speak to those kinds of changes during the zoning process.
Through the chair, Edward John, planner for Landwise, and assisting with the development side of this process. Obviously, we're here today on the heritage side, and I think that's a valuable question back to the council in terms of the ultimate goal of this area. We've heard today trying to achieve some cohesive commemorative space, recognizing what we're losing if this is to proceed to demolition. As we work on the development application, and we're still working on that, there's several elements which I think could provide the opportunity. I don't think I'm in a position today to provide full commitment, but in terms of the opportunity, we've heard of the event space itself, which, through that process will evaluate not only what it looks like, but what it could be used for. There still hasn't been a full decision. There's going to be a range of, ideas that will utilized for the event space. We obviously have the lobby space and the interpretive space, but we've also, different to the previous Tivoli application, this application also concludes those commercial spaces along Wilson Street. And there have been discussions about, recognizing this area for its wealth in the culture and arts. What can those spaces be used as to not only give back, but to fit in with that cultural expectation of James Street, which has been the allure of the development team. Is why they chose this, and obviously why they initially tried to ensure the restoration in situ of the Tivoli Theatre. So, it's a long way of saying we're still working on it. It will be determined through the development application. Today, we are looking at what is available for the commemorative space. We are committing to certain areas for that, but it is still a little bit in flux until we get all of the design consideration and development considerations through the subsequent process. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question fully, but there is opportunity here, and we are in the position to certainly evaluate what we can do to reflect some of those concerns coming from the loss of the Tivoli, but also the positive outcomes that we can deliver on the development.
Yeah, I was looking for a commitment, to be honest, that you would look into those things today. And I hear you're saying you're not really committed to doing that at this time, and that's fine. There's a zoning process. I'll see you there, but where I'll be definitely asking for more information and more of a commitment from you to do something that the community itself will find value in. Secondly, I have 3 questions. Secondly, I think I wanted to ask you specifically. I mean, a bell has been rung, and I don't know where the bell was rung, and I apologize. I'm real good at bringing my sources to things, but occasionally, I fall down the stairs on something, and I can't find where this was said. I think it might have been said at Heritage Review Permit Subcommittee. But someone said, look, we know that we came to this project intending to restore this building based on what we understood at the time, and a very preliminary assessment, I understand that. And I think the number was somewhere like $3 to $4 million is what we thought we'd have to spend, and now we're looking at spending $18 to $20 million. Some kinds of ranges like that. Am I making that up entirely, or did someone say that? And where? And if someone didn't say that, could you clarify what was your estimate in terms of the commitment you thought you'd have to spend to restore this theater, and where do you see that financial commitment now? If you were basically to recreate the entire theater from scratch, $6 million plus, obviously we're talking about. But what can you give us some ballpark estimates so we have a better understanding of that?
So through the chair to the council, and I'll let Paul jump in. We did provide some financial information in terms of the cost to restore the structure, the envelope, and that was upwards of the $5 million. That might be the $6 million. I don't recall seeing specific estimates on the restoration of the plasterwork. I think the evaluation has, to this point, looked at, can it be done? And I think that's the conclusion we're arriving at today, but maybe I'll pass on to Paul for some of more of the financial pieces, which would look at
if it's
cost
okay.
benefits.
My question's not for Paul. I really want to be clear. I just wanted to know, when you came to this project, what did you estimate you would be spending to do the restoration work? That's the number I've heard out there, is $3 to $4 million. I'm trying to get that answer.
Okay. So through the chair to the councillor, I'm not aware of that number. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it would cost in that ballpark for the restoration of the in situ work. I can work with the team, and we can potentially offline come up with that, but it wouldn't be insignificant.
Okay. My last question for now, and then I have a couple comments before I turn it over to other people I know are anxious to ask questions, is about the short-term use. So let's just imagine a situation where the James Street Baptist Church has a back lot. That back lot is growing with weeds, and there's all kinds of stuff there, and it's not really accessible to the public as a public space. We know, of course, parts of this property are used right now by the public for art crawl, super crawl, all kinds of things, right? So what is the short-term commitment from the development group in terms of, if this were to be demolished, what that space would be used for? How would it be controlled in terms of fencing? How would it be patrolled in terms of security? And how would it be able to be used and accessed by the city, its partners, other kinds of people in the community when there are things going on in the area, right? So we're continuing to try and pedestrianize our downtown and have more and more vibrant events and festivals. Like, how is this going to be integrated into this? I think it would be a real shame for, no matter what happens, for this whole thing to be sat locked away for a number of years while the development process is going on, and it kind of to be another space in our downtown that we have to kind of walk by, stare at, and feel upset about.
So through the chair to the councillor, and I think you are aware, so the owner of the site has made the site available, particularly on those large events such as Art Crawl and Super Crawl, for vendors to come in free of charge. They're trying to animate the space, and I recognize the concern that the development process does take time, and this could be that sawtooth on James Street in that interim period. So absolutely, we've had some preliminary discussions about obviously maintaining access through the site for those specific periods, but extending that to see the opportunity for other events and other abilities to animate the space as we go through the development process. There is the commercial plaza, which I believe will remain unaffected, but we've explored the idea of murals, of art installations, but maintaining some level of public access through that, whether at specific times or in general, making sure obviously the treatment of the land itself, whether it's graded, sorted, safe for those levels, because it is an important integral area of the site. And we're also connected to that pseudo small area park. And through this process, we are looking at, the POPs idea where you have that publicly accessible private space, and how do you bleed that out of the site itself for that long term. But particularly in the interim, we would be absolutely open to the idea of creating, through discussions with the city, the continued access for public, not just on certain events, but for longer periods, and making sure it's safe.
Right, and that includes the space, not just in the commercial area, but of course the place where the Tivoli is now, and so making sure that that's grassed or whatever it might be. I know Alyssa wanted to jump in quickly, so I'll turn to her.
Through the chair, again, Alyssa Golden, Cultural Heritage Program Lead. I just want to note in terms of the staff recommendations for the proposed conditions of approval of the heritage permit, as a part of condition I related to the larger conservation strategy which we would require prior to demolition, that would include a requirement for an interim site plan. So just an understanding to the points being discussed here of how the site will be treated in the interim after demolition before redevelopment happens, and we would be looking for that to come back through staff and address some of the key points that you've heard just in terms of this discussion.
Thanks. And of course, there's $1 million security as part of all that. And there's different kinds of things built into it. I'll make some comments and then I have no more further questions at this point. I just want to say, I'm as angry as everybody else is. Let's be really clear. I didn't sit on this committee lightly. I didn't decide to be here as the representative for City Council on the Heritage. Set up a Heritage Council in Ward 2 because I care about the heritage assets here and want to make sure we protect them. What I'm hearing from these folks is that these assets don't exist anymore in a salvageable means. So my focus is on what the community gets from this space, what we can do. I'm also focused on the idea that we need housing in our downtown core, whatever that looks like. And so if we save the sort of just shell of this, which again, seems like it's not even very savable with broken bricks and things like that, just to get to that point of understanding that is $6 million. On top of that's another $10, $15, $20 million probably in terms of all kinds of other things that would have to happen. And then that would mean this couldn't really be built up any kind of way in that footprint where the 7,500 square feet exists essentially, right? It's about 700 square meters approximately, and that's about 7,500 square feet. And so the question becomes, what does the community get for this? And I just want to let everyone know, look, I'm very, very committed to making sure that whatever happens here, that there's an actual usable community benefit that the community cares about and wants to have happen. One of the great things about what happened in this process, even though much of it is quite sad, and I'm pretty dismayed about it, is that we have zoning tied to this specific situation. So that means that this can't just go through a process without public consultation. It can't just happen by active council. Zoning is a public process, and we have to go through the zoning process from scratch again. And so that's really important as a check. That's a place where we can have conversations about community benefits to a certain extent. That's where we can talk about what it's going to look like. I think that's important. So that's kind of where I stand on this project. I'm pretty depressed about the fact that we're going to lose something like this, or we could lose something like this. I don't think what's here is salvageable. And I'll say from being in here, the pictures don't do it justice. I have reels and reels of photos of plaster coming off and all kinds of other sections. The entire roof of this place is just kind of slowly caving in, and all the plaster is kind of peeling off of it. And if we can save some of these elements and put them into a new space and make sure that space has a good community use, great. That would be something hopeful to have for our future. I think it's sad when we lose heritage assets, when this kind of stuff happens, and we can't let this continue to happen. One thing I can say from a political perspective is that we're going to have to invest in making sure we protect our heritage buildings. And I understand what the delegate said earlier about we can have a McMaster student help in some of this work, except the city holds liability. So that McMaster student can't be liable for a decision, can't be liable for a report. We have to have an engineer, a structural engineer, a professional who holds a designation there with that person. And guess what? We're going to have to hire them. We're going to have to put them on the tax payroll, and we're going to have to make sure that they are there to assist us in these situations. We were able this time to get a third-party review, and that's great, and that probably cost us money to do that. But having people around who are accountable to the public through the municipal government is something I hear people asking for. It's great if you get the developer to hire someone, but the public doesn't always have faith in that process. They want to feel like the people working at the city are the ones who are accountable for this, who are the ones who are doing that work. And I'll say we've been able in the last 3-4 years to expand some of the heritage department, I'll call it, and make it a little bit bigger and have more staff there, and that's wonderful. But that's not decisions that the previous councils made. They did not put the resources into the budget to make this happen, and that's what we need to have happen. And so just telling you I'm committed to making that happen. The mayor's got a motion on the table for us to explore what we need to be doing to ensure we preserve those buildings, and it's going to take some work. This is 25 years of us not putting the resources in as politicians, not the staff's fault, us not putting the resources on the table when asked for them. So if we want things to be better, we're going to have to change things. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Andrew, you ready for your question?
Yeah, I have a number of questions. First couple are for staff. So out of the 9 criteria for designation, how many of those criteria are actually architectural?
Through the chair, I'd probably have to just double check. There is still historical associative value, and then in terms of design physical value, what remains is the design of the interior auditorium and lobby that is inside the structure.
So how many are not those? Like which other criteria does it fit that aren't the design, the architecture, that type of thing?
I might actually ask because, so we have the previous 2 designation bylaws, and then the consultants prepared an updated culture, heritage, impact assessment, which included a review using Ontario Regulation 906 to confirm those criteria. So I might just potentially look to Deb potentially to answer that for you. Sorry to put you on the spot, Deb. I'm also checking my report. I believe I did have the summary in my staff report as well.
Yes, thank you. No problem. And through you, Mr. Chair, the most loss was under contextual criteria. The design and physical value is remaining as in the Italian Renaissance style interior of the auditorium, and there is historical and associative value of the history, of course, of the Tivoli Theatre and the legacies of the carriage factory. And the architect, of course, for both.
So it meets at least 2 criteria even without the building then?
Through the chair, so I'm looking at Appendix A attached to the staff report, so the cultural heritage impact assessment provided by the applicant. Section 3 of that, and starting on page 21, is an updated summary of those criteria. And so it does confirm it does still meet criteria 2 for the interior design value. Under historical associative, it still meets 2 of those, criteria 4 and 6, and does not retain any contextual value under criteria 7 through 9.
Okay. And then was there a condition assessment done in the past? I'm guessing probably around 2004 when the first part of it fell down?
Through the chair, so my understanding in reviewing the history of that file and at that time, I know that things were moving very quickly in terms of the partial collapse and then the need to do the partial demolition. I have not seen a specific structural assessment from that time. I think that was happening sort of on site as they were determining where to stop the demolition in terms of it being sound structure. So my recollection of the file from the 2004 period is that there isn't a specific report that I could point to or highlight. I'll also note in terms of having worked on and commented on the 2014-2015 rezoning process, as far as I recall, there wasn't a specific condition assessment at that time. There was a heritage impact assessment provided as a part of that process. But nothing that spoke to any immediate concerns that would need to be addressed that we would have followed up with as staff through either municipal law enforcement or building inspections.
That's, to be honest, outrageous to me that a building that partially fell down 20 years ago, no one ever thought maybe we should do a condition report before today. Yeah, I can't even, to be honest, that staggers even the rest of my questions because I'm so surprised by that one. To the consultant team, how long has the owner been doing this type of work? Like, I assume he's got quite a history of, doing development work either within this city or a different city.
Yeah, maybe I'll address that if either Edward or myself will address that through you, Mr. Chairman. The owner is very sensitive to heritage work, and I think they're very disappointed that they can't. They are the owners. They are the same people that developed the Ancaster Mill, which if any of you are old enough to remember the condition of the Ancaster Mill, it was terrible, but it was still salvageable. They did the Cambridge Mill. They've done the Elora Mill and several other buildings in the community, which are all heritage buildings. And they've presently been awarded the restoration of the Toronto Power Generating Station, which is an E.J. Lennox building in Niagara Falls. The commonality between all those buildings is that they are much better structures with high integrity. They were largely stone buildings through and through, and they hadn't gone through the unfortunate, devastating damage that this building has gone through with the water.
So he's been doing this a long time.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Douglas, yes, to answer you directly, a long time, yes.
I get promotion. Yeah, so, because I've been doing this for a very short period of time, relatively speaking, and if I'm looking at a building that's been abandoned for 40 years or 30 years, I guess, I'm not looking at a building that is salvageable. And to say that, to come in and say, oh, we're going to save it, and then 2 years later, oh, it's got to be demolished. Nothing's changed in 2 years. Nothing's changed in 30 years, in 20 years. It seems very questionable that the idea was ever really to salvage this building.
I can't comment on that. I know that we were involved we worked with the client to look at options for salvaging it, and sadly, I'm the one who discovered the systemic issue with this building, and I revealed it to the present owner. So I guess I'm the one to to blame, so to speak. Yeah.
That's everything.
Are you finished, Andrew?
Yes.
Okay. Andy's got a couple of questions.
Yeah, through the chair. I've got so many things I like to say, but I'm quite devastated on the situation of how we got here. So I don't know if this is the forum to actually do it. Maybe it'll be discussed at a further date, but I just felt I had to say something at the time. We have a bunch of safeguards that we hope is in place to save heritage. We've got a lot of dedicated people throughout the city, whether it being city staff or residents that try to preserve it. And in this case, part of the process was done. It was designated. But something was a massive failure in this situation. And I guess this question would be to staff, if something is looked at where that failure happened on this particular, this wasn't a one-time 100-year storm that hit the area that caused damage. This is decades and decades of neglect of a designated building. And different owners, I don't know if somebody's responsible or if you even look at who's responsible or just try to make it not happen again. But it's very disappointing for myself personally. I put a lot of effort into trying to save heritage, as we all do, and I volunteer for it. I'm not saying, but and I love doing it. But when you see something like this of a building that collapsed in 2004, whatever the date was, and or partial collapse, and it just there was still years of neglect, getting to the point that there's no choice than to demolish the building. It's extremely disappointing for myself. So my question, I guess, sorry for taking up your guys' time, maybe the staff or councillor is there a system in place that assists something like this, that we actually look into it to find out where the shortcomings happened and how can we make sure it doesn't happen again? That's all I have. Thank you.
Through the chair, Ken Coit, Director of Heritage and Urban Design. Thank you, Andy. We do, staff share your disappointment and concern. I can't really speak to the specifics of this project, having only been involved in heritage in my role here for about 2.5 years. I will point out, as Councillor Kretsch pointed out, that the mayor has asked for us to review this, and we expect a fulsome review to be looking at this in a wider, systematic way about why this is happening. But from a heritage point of view, I'll point out that it's always a bad idea to have a building unoccupied. And it's an even worse idea once the heat goes off. And we've learned that over the years. So you'll note in examples more recently with Pinehurst, that building, we worked with the developer to make sure it stayed occupied and heated during construction and during the time that the development application process was going forward, to make sure it's safe and secure, it's used, the heat's on. And so that's the method we're going forward with. I expect we'll be working with our friends in municipal law enforcement and building to be strengthening our ability to work with owners to make sure that basic property standards are dealt with earlier in the process, so we don't get to the point where we have catastrophic failures or possibilities of catastrophic failures like we're seeing in this condition.
Through the chair, thank you very much.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Lynn?
Yes, through the chair, thank you. Thank you to the project team. That was a really informative presentation. I guess just to follow up on Andy's comments, the document here, one of my questions was how long has the vacant building registry been around? But this says it's been on the registry since 2020. I don't know when it started. But the other thing is that the city has been sending in building inspection or bylaws on a quarterly basis. I would have thought that somebody from the city would have recognized there was an issue, because this report says the city received concerns that the building was unstructurally sound, which to me says that it wasn't city staff that recognized it.
Through the chair. So a couple of points to that. In terms of the process for proactive inspection for buildings that are registered as vacant, it is from the exterior. So it's what you can see, unless you are gaining access to the property, is what you can see from the public right of way and from walking around the building. The particular issue that was raised that was addressed last fall through property standards order for the exterior repointing. My understanding is it was at the top corner of the building, and there were some loose bricks and some step cracking that might not have been entirely visible, and it was raised by the adjacent property owner who uses, I think, the shared space to access the parking behind the building. So very intimately has intimate knowledge of the site, which might have been why that was identified by them versus the proactive monitoring by staff. Yeah, hopefully that addresses your question.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I guess the issue here is that there's no inspection of the interior of these vacant buildings. This was vacant for over 20 years. Is there no process in place to ensure that the owners are taking care of the interior? I mean, water damage, as a, from my experience with Greensville, it was the interior and water damage that was the issue. And obviously water is what's caused all of these problems with the Tivoli Theatre. How can we address this?
Through the chair, Ken Coit, Director of Heritage and Urban Design. Unfortunately, we don't have with us, we do have Tori here from MLE. Tori, would you be able to take that question? Perhaps not. Oh.
Oh, there we go. Hi, yes, so my name is Tori Aketi from Bylaw. Sorry, could you repeat the question, sorry?
I was just wondering how we can address the issue of a vacant building sustaining water damage or any damage in the interior when the inspections are only on the exterior of a building. There seems to be a definite lack of something.
Yeah, because of the height of the building, I'm unable to view the roof. However, with the interior inspections from building department as well as heritage department, I was able to view the condition of the roof. So it would probably be something we'd have to speak to management over here at bylaw regarding any interior inspections, as I don't have the power to enter a building without permission from the owner. Otherwise, I would need to get a warrant to be able to inspect the inside.
Paul, do you have a comment?
Oh, I just wanted to make a correction, Mr. Chairman. The projects that I cited as examples for the, I can't remember the member, the name of the member, forgive me. They're projects that our firm has been involved in, not necessarily this owner. Just for the record.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That was for Councillor Douglas. Anyone else have any comments?
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Thank you very much. I want to say I found the presentation very thorough, very, yeah, the research is well done. And I've got to say, looking at the owner of the Tivoli right now, if you're saying that they're the same owner as the Ancaster Mill, the Elora Mill.
No, they're not. That's what I'm clarifying. Yeah, those are projects that we've been involved in, not this group. Yes, they're not involved at all in those projects. This is that's some other group. Our firm has been. I misunderstood the question. I thought it was asking what projects we've been involved in. So we've been involved in those projects. No, they're not the. This group is not involved in those projects whatsoever.
Okay. All right. Well, that sort of changes what I was going to say.
My apologies. My mistake. I misheard the member.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, well, thank you, everyone. I was going to make a comment more than anything else. We lost the front part in 2004, and we lose the Century Theater in 2010, roughly. And then we lost the Gore buildings all to water. Are we ever going to learn? Are we ever going to improve our processes? Ever going to make sure we save our buildings in a better way? Like, I know it takes a lot of political resolve, not just at the city level. We have to talk at the provincial level to provide new rules, policy structures, and the tool set kits for the city to start entering these buildings and proactively inspecting and leaving it on the property owner's bill, not the taxpayer's bill. So we don't lose any more buildings. It's a repeat. Like, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And this is what we're doing right now. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Stefan, you got a comment?
Yeah, thanks to the chair. It was a great presentation. I just have a question for staff. So it sounds like the structure that holds the designated plaster finish is compromised. So there would have to be a complete demolition of the building regardless. Now, if they decided to replicate that plaster finish, would the heritage designation still apply to the replication, or would that be completely null and void at that point?
Through the chair, that's a very good, almost philosophical question, I would say, in terms of is that still the same heritage resource? I think it would depend on what the outcome of this particular situation is and whether it would make sense to repeal a designation bylaw after that work were to be undertaken. The current staff recommendation is to not recommend repealing the designation bylaws until the entirety of the work is complete, and part of that is to ensure that the proposed conditions for financial securities and the preparation of a conservation strategy and the implementation of all of that work is completed before the bylaws would be repealed, and the means and mechanism of following through on those conditions is finished. So, but philosophically, and maybe plus VG and folks want to chime in on this, but essentially the actual authentic resource would be gone. It would be recreated.
Yes, it is a philosophical question, Elisa. I mean, there's some debate around this topic as well on an international level when it comes to the replacement of heritage fabric. When elements are replaced that have been destroyed within the context, let's say the majority of the context is original, then ethically, I think that, I mean, we're bound by a lot of sort of ethics. The Venice Charter is one of the most significant documents, which is an international document, and that essentially says one of the canons of that is that if you're going to replace something that was heritage, it must be very distinguishable, clearly distinguishable from what the original fabric is. You get extreme examples of that in places like Milan, the cathedral in Milan, where they've replaced stones that had deteriorated, and they've engraved the date of the replacement, large engravings on the face of the stone saying it was replaced in 2020 or whatever. My opinion on it is that once the heritage fabric is gone, there is no longer a designation on the idea of what was there already in the past. And it would be really tough if the Heritage Act said to everybody that if you tear it down, you have to build it exactly the way it was. And how do you build it exactly the way it was? Because we would never build that we would never build anything today the way that is built, and we would never do the finishes the way that they are built currently. So it becomes vaporware, and it's kind of really ethereal. So it's a very good question. We get asked it all the time, and in my humble opinion, I'm not a creator. I'm not one. I'm not one of the writers of the policies that we all live with. But in my opinion, it's gone, unfortunately. And if you have good people that want to commemorate it and look at the cultural significance of the site and what it meant, then we're fortunate to do that. And I think that these owners are quite interested in doing that. And there are some elements from this that we can salvage in situ and incorporate into the building. But I have to say it's debatable. It's all debatable. How did I do, Elisa?
Thanks, Paul. Through the chair, I'll also just note in our staff report under the policy section, there is mention of our city policies from our official plan that speak to when we do lose a heritage resource, what the appropriate measures of mitigation are. And I will note that the recommendations from the applicant's cultural heritage impact assessment and staff's recommendations for conditions of approval of this permit are in line with those expectations in terms of commemoration interpretation, sort of paying homage to the design, fitting into the recreation and interpretation of the former carriage factory portion on James Street North, the full scope of what's being proposed and recommended here in our staff conditions are consistent with those policies.
Okay, does anyone have any follow-up questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll move her in a seconder to receive the presentation.
I see Andrew and Karen.
Is anyone opposed? Okay, seeing none, we can move on. So now we'll move on to the actual report. So do you have a mover and a seconder to put the report recommendations on the floor?
I see Councillor Crutch and Lynn.
I have to read through all this? Good, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks very much. I want to make a couple of final comments on this as we're getting to the report. Firstly, I want to thank the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee, who didn't have the benefit of all this information, frankly. So I want to say that. So when you went to consider this, you didn't have the third-party independent report. You didn't have the benefit of having all these folks here to ask questions to and to get a detailed explanation for. And so I completely understand why the vote went the way that it did and why people are so angry, especially hearing about it right away. The reasons why I'll be supporting the staff recommendation today primarily are the last things Paul said. We've heard all the reasons already why, but the last thing he said is important. If we are attempting to salvage what's left that we can keep for future generations, we're going to have to do that quickly. And that work's going to have to start soon and as part of a demolition process so we can get those things out of there. If we wait, tie this up, let it sit there, try to structurally reinforce it, and I don't know, a major storm comes through and collapses the roof, any number of things can happen, then we could get ordered to demolish, and then that's it. Those things are going to be gone, and there's not going to be time to save them. The work of saving them alone is going to cost a lot of money, but the work of actually doing that, going in there, sensitively excavating those kinds of things, making sure they're preserved and replicating them is in itself quite a bit of work, and it needs to start immediately. So I'm sensitive to that because I hear the community saying, let's try and save some of this stuff. If we want to, then we're going to have to act quickly, and so for the safety also of everybody in the neighborhood. I don't need to talk to you all about what it feels like when buildings collapse and what it means for us all. I was there at that site in Gore Park just maybe 12, 15 hours before and understand the impact of when buildings collapse, what it does. Don't want to see that happening here. And we're hearing clearly from these folks, it's a safety concern. It's in danger of collapsing, especially that one corner. And I think now that we have that knowledge and have that information, we have to act responsibly about it. So I'll be supporting staff's recommendation very reluctantly and hopeful that we can continue to figure out through the mayor's motion why these things keep happening, prevent them from happening. And to Graham's point, we know that water causes this problem. We know that we have to get the right staff on board to be able to inspect these things more proactively. And I'm committed to doing that as a member of this committee on this term of council, and committed to making sure that whatever happens here, we get a community benefit that people can look back to and think, proudly of.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions on the recommendations? Andrew?
Yes, through the chair, I do have some comments regarding the recommendations. What was really funny is as soon as I saw this and all the other things that are happening in Hamilton, what comes to my mind first is actually a Simpsons episode where Bart Simpson buys a factory and he asks Milhouse to watch over it. And then he comes back the next day and it fell down. And he's like, what, weren't you watching it? It's like, yeah, of course I was watching it. I watched it start to fall over and then it fell over. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Everyone watched it. We've been watching this building for 40 years and we watched it. Part of it fall over, no one did anything. The rest of it fell over, no one did anything. And approving this really sends a message to developers that don't worry about heritage. Just open the windows, let nature take its course. The building will fall down, you don't have to worry about it at all. Now, my direct concerns with the report itself are really that, there's a lot of, we could do this or we could do that. And if you approve demolition, then we'll work with you and we'll do something. And what we're going to end up with is 3 glass cases with the remnants of this building in it so that the developer can go, look, we defeated heritage. Here's our monument to that. Like we have so much in this city. So many monuments to failure of where heritage, we just did it. Council just did it to the church over by the library, where they're going to have a couple pieces sitting inside the lobby, but the building is long gone. Heritage is not viewed as important in this city. And it's being seen time and time again. And now we have a report that says that, we'll work with them and we'll come up with something. No, I want to see exactly what they're doing before I approve a demolition. I want to know exactly what it is, what the conditions are, what they're actually going to do before an approval happens. It is definitely a safety issue. And I agree. But you know what? This person bought the building knowing full well that the thing's coming down, because we've all known the thing's coming down. So guess what? Hurry up and do it then. Hurry up and get us these reports and get us what you actually intend to do. And then maybe if it's actually something that commemorates the heritage in a real way, that's something that I could approve. That's it for me.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to respond to that. I hear you. I think that the balance or the problem or the issue that's in front of us is that, and I see this every day as a member of the planning committee. So as you know, I'm on the Heritage Committee. I'm also on the planning committee. I'm going to steward this through and I'm said to you, and I mean it, I'll do everything I can through the zoning process, ensure we get something. It's not just a glass case with things in it. And I've heard from them today, and they're saying they're not going to do that. It's on the public record. So I'm not worried that's what we're going to end up with here. I think the issue is that if we decide to wait for a site application process where all these details come forward, I'll just tell you again, as a member of the planning committee, that's going to take months and months and months. What I hear is that in the next several months, this is going to get worse and worse and worse. And we're at a point of it's a very depressing thing. I mean, this time of year especially. But we're in a place where the weather is not great, meaning it's wintertime in Canada. We all know what that means. And so I don't think I'd feel okay sleeping at night knowing that this is going to sit there waiting to potentially fall down. We were very, very lucky that no one was injured when the Gore Park buildings fell down. I know that I don't want to be in a position where that's the case, where something happens here and someone gets injured, because it's on a main public thoroughfare and area. There's construction actually actively going on right now on Houston Street, if you don't know that. Other kinds of building happening across the road. There's other kinds of stuff happening in the area and lots of people. And I'm really worried about something happening to this building where it falls down or starts to collapse and then we don't get to save any of the heritage features. So, I think that's where my focus is. I understand, again, why people are frustrated about this. I don't think this sends a message to people that they can get away with doing this. I don't think that the current owner is ultimately 100% responsible for why we end up here today. Yes, you're right that they had some foresight to come into this development, should have known these kinds of things. But I'll tell you my experience that a lot of times when these transactions happen around heritage buildings, they're not always an opportunity to do a huge full assessment right up front and understand all the issues. There's one in Corktown right now where folks came in, bought some apartment buildings and thought that they were going to be in a reasonable shape. And then as they did more investigations, they got more professionals involved, they found, we're in a bit of a situation here for maintenance, other kinds of things. So I take them at their word. I think these professionals who've looked this stuff over have also done that work and made sure that it was in their reports. So yeah, I understand your frustration, though. It is deeply frustrating, all of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do feel, my opinion has changed from the Permit Review Committee meeting to now, where I do feel that we're better informed about everything. We have second opinion or third opinion or whatever it is. And I don't think I don't think that there's much opportunity to save this, right? I mean, we've heard all the risks, all the weaknesses in this structure as compared to other structures that have been saved. So, I think that we should take the recommendation as staff has made, as the people on the screen have made, and salvage what can be salvaged, but the rest of it realize it is a tragedy. It is absolutely tragic, but I don't see a lot of other choice here either in terms of being able to restore this. So that's how I'm going to vote.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, I'm going to keep quiet myself because I don't think I could do it very reasonably. Okay, so but I'll vote on the recommendations. Is there anyone opposed to accepting the staff recommendations? Okay, only seeing two. Staff recommendations were passed. Okay, can you make sure the record reflects that the two oppositions, please? In the report, yeah. Like, can we take a 5-minute recess? Thank you.
That's what I was just going to suggest. Okay, 10-minute recess, so we'll come back for 3 o'clock. Okay. Oh, anyone opposed? Seeing none? That is. Welcome back, everyone. We're now moving on to our consent items. We have before us item 9.1, which is our Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee Year in Review 2024, which is PED 24235, and staff are going to provide us with a quick presentation.
Thank you. Through the chair, just looking to share full screen, and I haven't done that in a while. Let me just try to find it. Sorry, Matt, I'm not. Do you know where the full screen button is? Okay, thank you. So in front of you today is just an information report giving you a summary of everything that this committee and Heritage staff have done the past year, and just want to walk you through some of those highlights with some slides. So we've had a very busy year in terms of designations. Shown here are just some highlights of some of the properties that we've had designation bylaws passed for this past year. And looking at the actual passing of bylaws, we have 13 designation bylaws passed this year. And just to give you an idea of how this compares since amalgamation, you can see we're on a steady increase. That jump in 2022 was actually due to the water down inventory. So this is a pretty substantial number of bylaws that we've been able to bring forward in a single year, looking over the last 20 or so years. But also important to note, and as was included in our staff report just a few months ago on our overall designation work plan, obviously there's different steps to the designation process. We've managed to advance just over 20 designations this year in review of properties for designation. So in addition to actual bylaws passed, we also have properties that are currently subject to notices of intention to designate, which are highlighted here. And through our new process for dealing with requests to designate and addressing the pressures related to potential prescribed events under the Planning Act and the new process related to registered listings, we now have a new process where we list properties that are identified as candidates for designation on a public list. And we've been providing updates to this committee throughout the year, and shown here is a summary of the 11 properties that have been screened by staff and added to this public list in 2024. Also, in terms of properties we've proactively listed on the register, and as this committee knows, we now have to be strategic about how we do that because of the limitations on how long and when we can relist properties. But we have proactively listed a number of individual properties throughout the year through our proactive listing reports. As well, we saw a huge chunk of properties proactively listed in Dundas, and that's following the Melville Street Heritage Conservation District study and providing interim protection while we work through the next stages of that process and preparing a plan next year. And as summarized in the information report, just a high-level sort of set of statistics of what we've been doing the past year in terms of meetings, reports, heritage permits processed, and all the great work that you folks do in terms of your working groups and its commitments as well. And of course, the thing that keeps us going, the recognition awards, is really a fantastic opportunity to celebrate the positives of heritage and what's been done across the city. And it was a fantastic event this June with 24 winners across 11 categories identified through this committee. And I also just wanted to highlight that staff also hosted a walking tour as a part of the Professional Planners Conference that was held here in September. And we did a tour of the historic Durand neighborhood and walked planners around the neighborhood, showing how intensification has been addressed in the neighborhood, one of the oldest in the city of Hamilton. And then I just want to give my thanks to our overall heritage planning team. There's a small but mighty and continuing to grow group of us that are accomplishing this work across the city, from our chief planner down to our Heritage Co-op students, which help us tick. And just want to thank our staff who are either on leave and also returning from leave, and all the contributions of our team this past year. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that presentation, Alyssa, and thank you to everyone. I think this is a testament to all of the work that volunteer members have been involved with, but what staff has been able to undertake over this year. It's incredible to see where we've come from and what we've been able to accomplish in just that 1 year. So really do thank you for putting that report together, and that's a great testament. May I have a mover and a seconder to put for receiving this item? If there's any questions.
We'll put the report on the floor. So I see Karen and Graham.
And is there any questions or clarifications? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed as we move to vote? Seeing none, that item is carried. We'll now move on to the balance of our consent items. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the balance of the consent items on the floor?
I see Andrew and Graham.
So these are our education and communication group working group meeting notes, number 9.2, as well as 9.3, which is our heritage permit review subcommittee meeting minutes. Is there any questions in regards to that? As we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. I will now pass chair back over to Graham.
Okay, so now we're on to item 10.1, the demolition of 537 King Street Road East, or King Street East, Hamilton, being a non-designated property listed in the Municipal Heritage Register with unsafe order to comply. This was the former Rebels Rock building. We have a mover and a seconder to put this item on the floor.
I see Andrew and Andy.
Is there a staff report for this one?
Through the chair, no formal presentation from staff on this. I will just highlight, so the staff recommendation is to remove this property from the register. Obviously, another unfortunate series of events in terms of getting to this point, as this was a property we were hoping and was planned to be integrated into a redevelopment of a larger site. However, it was in the process of being demolished just yesterday and is probably finishing up today. And this is an administrative step to remove it from the register.
Thank you, Alyssa. This one really hurts me because this is a building that I researched along with Janice Brown to try to get designated, and through being empty and cold and 2 fires and apparently structurally unsafe, even though it took a lot of effort for that machine to knock it down yesterday. So I don't know how unsafe it really was. But anyway, does anyone have any more questions? So, you know, mover and a seconder? Already had that, right? Okay. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, it carries.
Thank you, Graham. We're now on to our item 13.1, which is our buildings and landscapes. Does anyone have any properties that they would like to add or remove from the list today? Graham?
Yeah, I'd like to remove 537 King Street East.
Okay. Are there any other properties? Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Sorry, through the chair, just on that item, Graham, might I suggest instead of entirely removing it, it be moved to black? Because as the staff report indicates, there are items that have been salvaged and that will continue to be salvaged as a part of the final demolition that we hope to be reintegrated into new development. So there might be some ongoing monitoring that this committee might want to have as a part of that process.
Is there any control of where those pieces and parts are?
Through the chair, the owner is working actively with staff on that. Technically, for a listed property, there is no mechanism or heritage permit requirement in terms of tracking that. However, they do have a conditional site plan, and as a part of redevelopment, staff will be requiring conditions to ensure that those features are integrated.
Yeah. Well, see, I'm in person monitoring that. I don't know how to find the stuff, how to track it to make sure it's there. I'm just kind of wondering what's the point of having it on the list if you can't physically find it or look at it.
Fair enough. That makes sense, Graham. No worries.
Okay.
Okay. So, Graham, are you happy to move it to black instead of right off the list? Right. Okay. Okay. All right, so we have a motion. So Graham's before. Do we have a seconder for that? So Andy.
I see Andy.
Okay. And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed to removing that property off? Seeing none, that item is carried. Do we have any property updates on our list? Graham, and then any other speakers for updates? No. So go ahead, Graham.
Okay, again, back to St. Giles and Main Street East. There's been a huge amount of debris built up between the church and the fence that is endangering the church now if it catches fire. It's just a massive pile. I sent the picture on yesterday to Alyssa. It looks like the tents have collapsed that are there except for one. So it was inhabited by 3 sets of tents. The property owner is having no luck getting the people off. It does not look like the police are able to do anything. Municipal law enforcement's unable to do anything. I've not really heard back from Councillor Nan's office, but trying to get this site cleaned up so we no longer endanger the church and that beautiful Second Empire apartment building over on Proctor, which has a wooden deck 10 feet away from here. And in the parking lot of the church, someone's placed a box from a cube van very close to the building, which is now going to hamper any kind of fire department response. So it's really a dangerous situation. Someone's got to get in there and clean that up. It's getting beyond a joke. It's really getting bad.
Go ahead, Alyssa.
Through the chair, staff just want to thank Graham for his continued diligence on that. And I, as I understand it, you've been directly reaching out to the folks who represent the property owner, and they've been generally taking action. And you've also been including, I believe, municipal law enforcement on your emails. And I think the primary concern was related to debris, but you just also mentioned tents. So I just want to make sure, and maybe as a note to other members, if there are active concerns that you've raised that are related to encampments, to make sure that you also copy the unsheltered email when you're doing that.
Thank you, Graham, for that update. Are there any other property updates that anyone has before we move on? So may I have a motion to receive the updates? Do we have a mover and a seconder?
I see Andy and Graham.
As we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Are there any updates from staff?
Through the chair, I forgot to mention in my year in review, but I wanted to highlight that our own Scott Dickinson here recently was successful in shifting into a cultural heritage planner position with our team. So previously was in a planning tech and is now on a contract as a cultural heritage planner.
That's exciting news. Congratulations, Scott. Are there any other updates? Is there any other new business?
One question.
Sure, go ahead, Graham.
Our last meeting, we talked about possibly having these reports on the agenda. Did you get any, or the meeting minutes? Did you have any luck with that?
Yeah, through the chair. So committee can raise things in the minutes by moving a motion. So you could move a motion, for example, to like flag for planning committee the concerns that you have related to specific properties. So that's one way that you can go about getting a more detailed note on the minutes.
Thank you, Matt. So before we head out and adjourn today, I just want to wish everybody a very happy holidays and a Merry Christmas. I know it's been a long year. We've done a lot of work, as we can see from today's report and the meeting agenda today. But I just want to hope everyone has a very good holidays, and we'll be back again in January. All right. May I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn today's meeting?
I see Andy and Andrew.
Is there anybody opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried, and our next meeting is going to be on January 24th at noon. Thank you, everyone. Take care.